Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Sustainability Watch, a monthly series of webcasts from the Conference Board offering insights on sustainability on a truly global basis. I'm Paul Washington, Executive Director of the ESG Center here at the Conference Board. The Conference Board is the world's leading nonprofit think tank serving business and society for over 100 years, and the ESG Center focuses on issues of corporate governance, sustainability, and corporate citizenship and philanthropy. I'm truly delighted to host today's panel on purpose-driven companies. For over 50 years, there's been a debate about the purpose of corporations in general. It's a debate that has often been based on, I think, sometimes false dichotomies, because the fact is that all companies need to be profitable to survive, and all companies need to consider multiple stakeholders to thrive. But only some companies have chosen to become purpose-driven and to label themselves as such. Today, we're going to explore what it means to be purpose-driven, why companies choose to go down that path, what it takes to get it right, and what to look out for if you embark on this journey. And I'm really thrilled to be joined by a number of experts in this field, two respected corporate leaders with great personal experience in this area, as well as the author of an upcoming Conference Board report on the topic. But I'm not going to introduce them yet because we first have some housekeeping matters to attend to. So let me do that. First, we are offering CPE credit for today's live program. To get this credit, please enter your full name, email address, and specify CPE in the Request CPE credit space at the bottom of your screen. Please note that 3 pop-up messages will occur during the program to confirm your participation. Please click OK each time you see one, and you need to stay online for the entire webcast. Second, I want to underscore that we really welcome audience participation in today's session. You can ask questions at any time by entering them in the chat box at the bottom left of your screen. We'll work them into the conversation as best we can and respond to any unanswered questions after the webcast. Third, a few other housekeeping notes. You can download the slide deck of today's presentation in the download section at the bottom of your screen. You can enlarge your video if you want to see us more clearly by clicking the full screen view on the 4 arrows in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And please feel free to share this program with your colleagues after the fact, as it will be available on demand. And finally, please complete the evaluation at the end of today's session so we can incorporate your feedback into future sessions. So with that out of the way, I am really thrilled to introduce our panel today. We have Vivek Bapat, who is Senior Vice President, Purpose and Brand Experience at SAP. Welcome, Vivek. We have Elizabeth Roscoe, who is Global Head of Corporate Brand and Purpose at Western Union. And we've got Thomas Singer, a colleague of mine at the ESG Center. Thomas is the principal researcher at the Conference Board's ESG Center. He's the author of a report on purpose-driven companies based on empirical research, as well as interviews with 15 leading companies, including Western Union and SAP, that'll be coming out in October. So with that, as a bit of an introduction, let's set the stage and get some fundamental questions out of the way. And so, Thomas, could you walk us through some of the basics here? What does it mean for a company to have a purpose? What's the difference between having a purpose or a mission or a vision or values? All, code words that corporations throw around. And then what's the difference between being purpose-driven and having a purpose statement? So if you could just walk us through some of the basics here, I think we'll be all on the same stage.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Those are great questions, Paul. And there's, the topic of purpose has been very much in focus in recent years. And because of that, I think there can also be a little bit of confusion around what purpose means. So what I thought I'd do is just at a very simple level, provide some definitions for how we see the differences between things such as mission, vision, purpose, and values. And these are perhaps overly simplistic, but hopefully helpful in trying to discern what the differences are. So for instance, mission is really about what the company does and for whom it does those things. And vision is also a what. It's what the company wishes to accomplish, almost like an end state. Purpose, on the other hand, is the why. It asks or answers the why question, why the company does what it does, why it exists, essentially. And values are the how it does things, and the desired culture of the company. Now, again, those are fairly simplistic ways of thinking about this, but I think in what's becoming a fairly complex topic and lots of discussion on this topic, it's helpful to try to differentiate what we mean by each of these things. But on in this context, in the context that we're having today, when we talk about purpose and the role of purpose in companies, we're really talking about why a company does what it does beyond uh, making money for itself or for its investors, right? What does it, why does it exist, and why is it doing what it does? And there are a number of different views on the role of purpose, right? And many of those views revolve around the notion of stakeholder capitalism, as you mentioned, Paul, whether that means taking into consideration the the concerns or issues of various stakeholders, or engaging stakeholders in decision making, or even creating value for stakeholders in the long term. So these are kind of um, various ways of thinking about the role of purpose. But then there's also another view, which is that purpose-driven companies actually do more than just take stakeholders into consideration. They explicitly address one or more societal challenges. Right, so there, as you can see, there's not one single definition, I think, of purpose. There are a number of different views on this, and there's a spectrum of views as well. So I've used words such as purpose. I've used words such as purpose-driven. What's the difference here? And what we're seeing, and we'll get into this a little bit later, is that the number of purpose statements has grown overall. And a purpose statement is really an articulation of why a company does what it does. It usually results from an exercise on uncovering the company's history, thinking about the future, and really articulating, as I said, distilling why it exists and why it does what it does. That's a purpose statement. To be purpose-driven requires a bit more, right? So having a purpose statement does not mean a company is necessarily purpose-driven. Purpose-driven, I think, takes it a little bit further and takes that distilled notion of purpose into the strategy and operations of the company. So now you're actually deciding who you do business with based on your purpose. You embed purpose in your recruiting efforts. You embed purpose in the way you compensate or you reward. In other words, purpose becomes embedded into strategy. And that's really a bit more of what we're talking about when we're thinking about purpose-driven companies. So it's almost an evolution, if you wish. So I hope
Great.
that's helpful in painting perhaps a simplistic but maybe helpful notion of what we're talking about here. And I know that others may have.
Right. So you've painted the basic picture. So Elizabeth and Vivek, do you want to put some graffiti over it? How does Elizabeth? How does Western Union view purpose? How do you think about this topic? Where does it fit in? And do you have the same view about the linkages between vision and purpose and so forth? Just curious about that.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I like the way Thomas says, look, this is a simple description, and it really works, because I think even companies and the people involved in doing this trip themselves up on the difference between the two. We try to keep it really simple in Western Union. We think about two really clear lenses. What is it that we do, and why does it matter? What we do, of course, is around our mission and how we describe ourselves as an organization, and then why it matters to us as our purpose. What is the authentic way that our company can connect and use its core business to have a positive impact on society? And then, we take our how even further than culture and values, which are incredibly important at Western Union, and we think about the how we get there, right? Which is our ESG strategy and the goals that we set ourselves to deliver against, so that we can, and to your point, Paul, we don't really have a purpose statement, a set of words that we can put on a poster on the wall in the office, but we believe we're a truly purpose-driven company, because we can look, everybody in the company can articulate our purpose, and truly there's a lot of passion for it. If you think about Western Union, our origins are in moving money for better. We started as a company enabling people who were underbanked to have the access to move cash internationally. And we've grown from there for being one of the leader in money movement and payments globally. So a lot of our employees um, and echo our customers. They are dual belongers. They, like myself, born in North Wales, now living in the US for the past 10 years, we understand the importance of being connected across borders. And so for us, the way we can measure our purpose is through our ESG strategy and the goals that we set ourselves.
Okay. That's really helpful. In fact, I like also the additional articulation of it's not just why what we do, but why it matters. I mean, that's a nice additional kind of perspective to add to this notion of purpose. That's really helpful. And Vivek, how does SAP, which has been on this journey for a while, how do you view purpose at your company? How does it fit in with all the rest of these things?
Yeah, so I think going back to what Thomas talked about in terms of sort of the classical definitions, and what Elizabeth talked about in terms of the interpretations of these in different businesses, we have a very similar point of view. And so just a few things I'd add to what's already been said, which is for us, purpose is not just the reason why we exist as a business, as a company, but it's also an optimistic view of how we see the world in the future. So it's an external facing view that is really taking into account um, the needs and the desires and the ambitions of the stakeholders that we want to
Hmm.
serve. So it's that external view, it's a longer term view. And then when you look at um, mission, or rather vision and mission, it's really the what is your place in terms of being able to achieve that larger purpose or
Hmm.
sort of goal that you set for yourself. So the mission really becomes, rather the vision becomes the what is your place, and then the mission becomes the how. How are you going to actually achieve it? So that's the way we look at it. And while we didn't necessarily follow sort of this classical definition, what we have articulated is a vision and purpose at SAP, which is to help the world run better and improve people's lives. And the way that we would do it from a promise, we call it actually a promise, is to help every company or every customer that we serve become a best
Hmm.
run company. And then the subtext to it is that that if that is the vision of the business, then our mission is to create the best technology and supporting ecosystem in order to service that customer. So it's sort of
Hmm.
a cascade of things. They're all interconnected, but I can say that I think different companies are going to have very different interpretations, and the best examples I've seen of purpose oriented companies outside of the purpose statement, right, is where purpose is driven both from the top down and it's also created from the bottom up, because there's a very significant aspect of, as just as Elizabeth mentioned, getting the employees to actually bring their personal purpose into the company's purpose. And once you can align those two, then you have something that's
Okay.
really authentic.
That's all really helpful. I mean, I think that, yeah, starting with these classic definitions, you've added the notions that um, purpose is linked to the future. It's linked to something external, which is partly why it matters, right? And that purpose really, even if your purpose statement is somewhat general, it's through the lens of combining purpose with vision and mission and so forth that you refine it and make it ever more specific to your employees and others as to what you're really all about. And I think that that's very helpful, as well as purpose being something that has to permeate the organization. So I think those are wonderful additional perspectives to what we've got here. So with that background, let's ask the audience, because it's always good to do a bit of a level set with the people who are here to watch and ask questions of us. So let's put up the first poll question, which is, do you believe that your company has a broader societal purpose? And there'll be a follow-up to that. Let's give this a little bit more. Okay. That's all right. Then maybe unlike the U.S. elections, the numbers seem to have stabilized fairly soon here, so we can call it. Let's see. So polls closed. So 85% of the people who are watching today and who answered this believe that their company has a broader societal purpose. Only 5% say no, and 10% aren't sure. So let's do a second question, which is especially for those who have said in the 85%, if you do believe your company has a broader societal purpose, do you believe that purpose is clearly articulated? Okay. All right. Looks like we can probably close this soon. Okay, great. There we go. Well, this is impressive, actually. I mean, 66% of the respondents here say that actually they do believe it's clearly articulated. There's a little bit of room for improvement at some, I guess, or for doing something else. So 28% say no, and 7% say they're not sure. So, I'm curious, Elizabeth, your reaction, Thomas, your reaction to those numbers?
Yeah, I'm happy to
It
pick up.
seems like
Yeah.
we've got a really impressive group of people watching us.
I got to say that I think partly, I'm not surprised to hear for two reasons, right? Firstly, people who are joining this webcast are genuinely deeply interested in this topic and are thinking consciously and intentionally about the purpose for their company. And secondly, I'm not surprised that most feel as though their company has a higher societal purpose. When we think about what's happening now in the external landscape, right, we think there is just so many more pressures facing an organization today, right? There's always on social media. There's almost unprecedented levels of activism. Social consciousness is all-time high, right? So pressure from kind of a public or customer space. Customers are boycotting products whose values they don't agree with, right? So on the customer side, we're seeing kind of like people taking action. And the same is true with corporate stakeholders, right? We're seeing investors having higher expectations on a company, migrating to ESG funds. So I think there's more pressure now to have a societal purpose. And I think this ties back to what Thomas was saying about, is it a purpose statement or are you living that purpose? I think I'm also not surprised to see the second question a little bit lower, because with that higher external pressure, it's actually more difficult to authentically and truly, as a corporation who still has a high pressure on shareholder value, to truly live a sort of stakeholder capitalism view and be able to deliver on that purpose and deliver it for all the different stakeholders that they have, from employees, communities, through to investors. So an interesting viewpoint, and actually kind of it's nice to see that, because it's kind of, I guess if I had to guess where those goes, it would be in a similar place.
Great. Any other reactions?
Yeah, I think what I think this poll actually indicates is just how hard it is to actually articulate a purpose statement. Because you can imagine kind of different roles that you might be able to serve, from the standpoint of society, right? But in order for the company and organization, especially some of the larger organizations like the ones that Elizabeth and I are in, where in the case of SAP, we are serving 440,000 customers across 180 countries. To come up with a statement that articulates what all of us, close to 100,000 employees across all of these different markets should all be committed to in terms of service to society is hard. And what I find is that companies who actually take the process of going through this exercise in a very serious way, where they're involving not just stakeholders, but their employee communities, usually have they struggle with this. But at the end of the day, they do come up with something that everybody else can feel that they were part of. So I'm not surprised with the second set of numbers, and it's just a reflection of how difficult it is. But one of the things that I will say here is that it's really easy for some companies to simply think of purpose as a slogan or a brand campaign. And the moment you do that, I think if you sort of imagine that that is the end state of why you're doing what you're doing, you're destined for failure. So I think you have to really think of it, and I think you said something really well earlier, which is this notion of values. And for us, it has been about what are the corporate values as well as personal values that lead up to this one statement that we came up with. And it was hard to come up with it. I mean, it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of permutations and combinations where everybody felt that this was something that we would all believe in.
No, very, very helpful perspectives. And I think picking up something you said, Elizabeth, companies, it's not that it's exclusive, but companies were often sort of in the 80s and 90s sort of driven by finance, then sort of a bit driven by data, right? And now we find with social media and so forth, they're being driven by people, whether it's their customers or employees. All those other things still matter, but I think there's been a bit of a shift that is causing some of this greater emphasis on purpose. And let's talk about that, Thomas, in your report. If you could give a sort of high-level overview of what you found about the evolution of purpose at the S&P 1200, and then maybe, we did an earlier webcast and report on what's happening with benefit corporations in the U.S., which by law are required to have a public purpose. So interested in the trends here. Maybe you can help us with that.
Yeah, and I think following up on the poll results, I too am not entirely surprised to see that a number of participants on this webcast find that their companies are articulating their purpose. In fact, as you see here, we've seen the number of purpose statements over time grow quite significantly, right? So a number of companies are now articulating their purpose and publicly going out with those statements. The question, though, becomes, are those statements being put into practice, right? Are they being embedded into strategy? Are they actually purpose driven, right? Or are these just purpose statements? So no big surprise on the number of statements out there, but it certainly is a tremendous growth. Almost 3 times as many companies with purpose statements compared to just 2015. And of those 223 companies within the S&P Global 1200 that have purpose statements, 46 of them identify as purpose-driven. So, a fair number, and actually that's up very notable from 2015 when I think we saw, I believe it was just a handful or so companies actually identifying as purpose-driven. So significant growth not only in the number of purpose statements, but also on those that identify as purpose-driven. The other thing that I'll note here is that of those 223 that now have purpose statements, 15 of them are including the purpose statement in their SEC filings. Now that's not a large number by any means. It's a very small number actually, but it's twice as many as did in 2015. So an indication that perhaps this is more than just nicely crafted words, but these statements are approved by boards, and they are, in theory, being put into strategy as well. So we're seeing growth not only in the number of purpose statements, but also the number of purpose-driven companies and the number of companies including these statements in SEC filings. So I think something worth noting. And you mentioned benefit corporations. I think what's interesting here is that we published some research earlier in the year that looked at benefit corporations and the growth in the number of benefit corporations in the US, but more specifically, it looked at the types of issues that those benefit corporations are focusing on. And by far, they tend to focus on social issues rather than environmental or even both. It's primarily social issues. And when we analyze these purpose statements, we found some trends that mirror those of benefit corporations. We actually found that about a quarter of the purpose statements specifically mention a social impact. For instance, health or health issues would be one primary example. Less than 10%, about 8% of them mention both a social and environmental impact in their purpose statement, and only 3% mentioned an environmental impact alone. So by large, the focus tends to be on social issues. Now, that hides another finding, though. I said about a quarter of them focus on social issues, but the majority of these statements, 65% or so of them, don't actually mention a social or environmental impact at all. They're fairly generic in nature. So just something to keep in mind as well in terms of the types of issues and the focus areas that companies are including as part of their purpose statements.
Great. That's really helpful. And it may be that the purpose statement doesn't carry the full weight here. It may be shared if you look at their mission and vision and values as well. That might refine that a little bit. But those are really interesting insights. I guess there's a great audience question about whether companies are actually walking the walk or walking the talk, whatever the phrase is, right? And we'll get to that a little bit later. We don't have a poll question, but we will be addressing that. There's another question here, Thomas, about there is some literature about how purpose-driven companies outperform. What have we found thus far? And I know that the data aren't perfect on this, but
yeah, you can run numbers in all kinds of ways. I think the simplest answer to that is that purpose-driven companies don't underperform by any means. There's no real reason to think that investors should shy away from investing in purpose-driven companies. The returns, when we look at returns over time, what we have found is that actually purpose-driven companies outperform their peers. But again, because there's, industry sectors can play a big role in that, I wouldn't be as comfortable saying, a purpose-driven company will outperform its peers. But what we can, I think, say fairly comfortably is that there's no reason to believe that investors should shy away from purpose-driven companies, because what we found is that they, at the very least, perform just as well.
Okay, great.
From
Thanks.
a TSR standpoint.
Got it. Right. On that measure, right. So they may outperform in other ways, but in terms of TSR. So that's really helpful. Okay, a couple of quick questions. Most of the companies we interviewed pointed to change in CEO leadership as the trigger for embarking on a purpose journey. Sometimes there are external factors. Maybe talk a little bit, if you could, about what started SAP in pursuing becoming purpose-driven.
Yeah, sure. So I think in my mind, when I look back at the evolution of purpose within SAP, and also looking at some of the research out there that Thomas has alluded to, in my mind there are really three types of purpose-driven organizations. The first is an organization which is what I would say born in purpose. So an example of this might be Tom's Shoes, where the entire business is predicated on service. Right, so it's a clear orientation towards the business. The founder believed in purpose from day one and created a business around that particular purpose. So that's one example. There's lots of companies out there in that vein. The second example is where companies actually have purpose thrust upon them, whether it's a market situation, right, or some other governing circumstance. And you can see a lot of companies during the pandemic, for instance, companies who have had to change supply chains and manufacturing lines and so on and so forth. They might have a certain type of purpose, but the market conditions have thrust this idea of purpose on many of these companies. And then there's a lot of companies in the middle, which is where purpose has actually evolved in synchronization with either market forces, that could be a combination of how consumers are reacting, geopolitical shifts. So there's a bunch of market forces, as well as technology changes, right? So there's a number of different external factors that might serve as sort of as a catalyst for the company to begin to reevaluate its purpose. So I think for us, it's been, and that's not to say, by the way, that you would fundamentally change what your purpose is, but you would make tweaks to that purpose, right? And so for us as a company, we've seen 3 or 4 different broad shifts. We've been in business for about 50 years. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary coming up soon. And so for us, we looked at the origination of the business was all about helping technologists succeed within companies. So really focusing on the IT department, if you will, and helping technologists do a better job in terms of serving the needs of the business. The second shift was when globalization happened, many businesses wanted to standardize their operations across the world, right? And so we served that particular need, and the purpose of the company really became about helping businesses run better and run at their best. And subsequent to that, we felt that businesses were now serving the needs of society as local economies developed and as consumers sort of became more connected to these businesses, whether it was from an employment perspective or whether it was, new types of purchasing power, especially in India and China and some of these emerging regions, we felt that business now wasn't just seeking profit motives. The businesses that we serve, for instance, were not just seeking profit, but they were actually uplifting and improving the conditions around them. So the purpose of the company then became helping the world run better. And then the last shift that we have seen is really all about consumerization of technology, right? So when you, especially with the mobile phone and the internet and social media, what we know is that these businesses are now extending their reach into the lives of their customers. So I would say about 8 or 10 years ago, actually in 2013 or 2012, we added this notion of helping the world run better and improving people's lives because we felt that, our vision could extend all the way to improving the way that individuals actually live all over the world. So it's been an evolution for us. And the only thing, the moral of the story here is that these types of forces are something that you should keep in account, take into account, and then keep evolving your purpose in that way.
No, that's really helpful. So even if you've embarked on the purpose journey for some reason, there are reasons to update it over time. I did a recent interview with Dick Parsons, the former CEO of Time Warner, chair of Citigroup, and one insight he had, which is pretty basic in some ways, but he just talked about corporations being responsive creatures, right? It's like, shine light on them and they move. So I think that that's just something to keep in mind, even when it comes to purpose. It's something that may evolve. And that sort of brings me to the next question, which relates to the governance of this and the role of board and investors. So Elizabeth, do you want to talk about, from Western Union's perspective, what you think the right roles are for the board and investors on this purpose journey, and what companies should be thinking about doing here? Because there has been some criticism about management going off on some things and not bringing the board and maybe sometimes the investors along.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I just want to echo what Vivek was saying. I think there's some really interesting parallels between SAP's journey and Western Union's. Similarly, a 170-year-old company that has always had an inherent purpose. Started with the customer, and Western Union is truly a kind of customer-obsessed company, and rooted in this idea of connecting people across borders, and then having a second shift, connecting companies to one another in trade networks and to our own platform, and then connecting kind of investors and our board. So we've seen a similar shift in journey, and the involvement of the board and stakeholders has been huge. If I think about the process we've been through, whilst we've had purpose in our DNA from the beginning, like Vivek said, we're making a shift ourselves now, right? We've got a broader business ambition now. And so our purpose is evolving again to take that into account. So the most recent work on bringing purpose to life and aligning the organisation, including our stakeholders, has really started at this nexus of marketing, purpose and corporate affairs at this time when we're trying to evolve to a broader business mission to be not only a leader in money movement and remittances, but also in the payment space. And so, if I think about the involvement, we actually really started with the customer. And we started with the question, how can we best create long-term value that serves our customers? And we evolved that to, how do we best create long-term value serving everyone? Our investors, our employees, our communities, our suppliers, our customers. In terms of involving our board, we actually created an ESG council of senior leaders. It's headed by a CEO that reports directly into a newly created corporate governance committee made up of some of our board members, so that there was a real dedicated focus at the board level and the executive team level to think about this. And we ran a, Vivek said it, we ran a robust process to go through what this really means for us. What is our purpose, and how do we define the ESG goals that will enable us to measure our progress against it and make sure it isn't kind of purpose washing and there isn't a purpose gap, that we're true to this. And that started with an immersion of all of our stakeholder and customer audiences. Where do we create value? And Vivek said it, and Thomas has said it. It had to be authentic and true to the work that the core business that Western Union is in, right? We move money, we enable payments internationally. How does that help to create greater social and economic inclusion? And there's a big piece for us in there. We spent time really building sets of words that help us define purpose and bringing goals and measurable KPIs to life to deliver it. And we researched it, right? We actually checked in with all of the different stakeholder groups to understand that this had credibility, it resonated, it was authentic. And then when we used the sets of words to describe purpose, they had meaning globally. These weren't just resonating in the US, in the English language, but something that globally our stakeholders and our customers and our partners, as well as our employees, could believe in. And finally, the biggest piece for me was making sure that we made this mainstream for all of our employees. We have about 150 million customers around the globe and around 12,000 employees. And we wanted to make sure that purpose is embedded in our cultures and our values and how we think as a company. And it's often where we start meetings, right? A reminder of why we're here, not what we're doing. So I don't know if that's a little bit of insight, and I'm interested in Vivek or Thomas have a different view. But for us, it's been pivotal to make sure the stakeholder view is aligned and the board were taken on that journey.
Okay, that's really great. And so, yeah, Vivek, I'd like you to, if you could, talk about, let's say you've got something that's authentic. You've got an authentic purpose. It matches what your business is. It matches your values, and so that's good. How do you go about actually, picking up on Elizabeth's point, how do you go about embedding that into an organization, especially one that serves across countries, across cultures, and how has it affected things like your decision making, your operations, your ability to attract people, and maybe your culture itself? So how do you go about embedding it, and what's its effect been on all of these aspects of how you run a company?
Yeah, that is really the fundamental question of how you make all of this, come to life, right? I think, so the way that we look at it is, we look at purpose both as an exemplar and an enabler. Exemplar meaning whatever we are going to say or do with our customers is something that we need to believe in and do ourselves. We are a business as well. We serve businesses. That's sort of the core, that's our value proposition, right? We help our customers, which are all businesses, small, mid-sized, and large companies around the world, run their operations more effective. And that's a whole range of things, whether it's managing people, whether it's managing supply chains, managing money, all of that stuff is something that we do. Now, when we take on this sort of dual role as an exemplar and enabler, that's when we believe that as an exemplar, we need to do things the right way so that the authenticity of our purpose is something that we can carry through to our customers and their customers, right? So, so that's one piece of it. In an enablement role, one of the things that we did was we basically created really what I would call a formal business strategy around this. And most companies, I'm not sure how many companies go through this type of a process, but we created a business strategy on the basis of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we asked ourselves, where is it that we can provide the most significant and differentiated value to our customers, given the authenticity of what we are doing within our businesses and the tools and technologies and value propositions that we bring to the table. So that was one aspect. And then we also said, well, how relevant is it to all of the customers that we actually serve? So we went through a classical exercise, and then we essentially brought it down to 5 core themes that we believed we could really sort of, differentiate and serve our customers in the best possible way. And those were around enabling a circular economy. They were about, activating climate action for those companies who were, serious about it. They were about equality for all, closing the digital skills gap, and then creating sort of this culture of social and inclusive entrepreneurship. So we really focus on that. Once we had sort of this strategy, the next step was, how do we now create the products that serve our customers on the basis of these 5 things that I just talked about? So we actually had detailed conversations with our product strategy teams to say, what are the types of enabling features that we can create within our own products that when businesses use them, they are going to be able to achieve their objectives on these 5 areas. The second one was looking at this notion of shared value. So when we talk to a customer, many customers have their own purpose statements and visions and missions, right? Where is that shared value between that common value that we share with that particular set of customers? And then once we understand what the shared value is, how can we actually be their most effective partner in helping them meet that objective? So there's a customer relationship aspect to it. And then the third one is really on the marketing side, which is, how do we run and activate different types of programs, whether it's to raise awareness about a particular issue, whether it's to be the convener of new types of innovations and solutions, whether it's to encourage entrepreneurship. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can do on that side. So really I think it all starts with a sound strategy, and then taking it, into every aspect of what you do, in a very methodical and structured.
Correct. So strategy affecting product, influencing customer relationships, and so forth. So that's really helpful. Thomas, I just wonder, from your perspective, for companies that have taken purpose to heart, right? What have you seen about in terms of its impact on how they make decisions, how they build it into their business, its impact on their ability to retain and attract people, and all that sort of thing? I'm just wondering how you've seen it play out at companies when they've got a purpose.
Yeah, and I think just Vivek just mentioned one of those really important ways, which is, when your purpose aligns with your customer's purpose or their values, or potential customers' purpose and values, that's when it can really be a catalyst for growth, right? So in much the same way that a sustainability strategy or an ESG strategy, if aligned with your customers' ESG goals and strategies, can also be a driver of innovation and growth, purpose can serve the same kind of role. So that's one way.
In fact, I'd just say that one of the things that sort of differentiates purpose from general ESG is often looked at largely as risk mitigation, right? If it's done right, it can be viewed as something that's positive. But purpose, going back to a point made earlier, is kind of inherently positive and affirmative and forward-looking, right? And so I think it's a natural springboard for what you're talking about, which is innovation and growth.
Yeah, innovation and growth. But on the flip side, it also means that there will be times when you have to make pretty hard decisions, right? Your purpose may not match your customer's values and purpose. And in those cases, what do you do? Right? So some tough conversations need to happen, likely at the very senior levels of the organization, which is why you do need to get the board kind of bought in on your purpose in the early days of that conversation. So some tough conversations need to happen, some tough decisions need to take place, and you may have to say, we will not pursue that potentially lucrative opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are a couple of ways. And the other way where we've seen through the various conversations we've had with companies that purpose plays a strong role is on the recruiting front. Mm-hmm. We've heard quite a bit about the role of purpose in terms of attracting talent. Millennials, Gen Z, they want to work for purpose-driven companies, right? So we heard that over and over in our interviews. But the other thing that came up was that some companies are using purpose more proactively to recruit for the right or the best kinds of candidates for those positions. So not just as a tool to attract candidates, but to actually screen for candidates. And so that's one different way that purpose has been used by a few companies. I don't know if Vivek or Elizabeth want to share some of that, if they have some experience in that as well.
Yeah, so maybe Elizabeth. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, two very quick. Sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about how
Sure,
you've
that's
seen it
so much direction there.
play out internally and even externally, having a purpose statement? And then Vivek, back to you. Sorry.
Yeah. So first of all, I agree with a lot of what Vivek said in terms of the approach and the strategy behind this. And Western Union's followed a really similar approach in terms of understanding the pillars that our purpose can come to life through, and then taking that down from a set of guiding principles. And by the way, we do think they've been incredibly relevant to business success and value creation. But integrating them into our core business strategy. You know, I can give a couple of examples, perhaps one on product and perhaps one on people, to Thomas's point. You know, in product, our purpose has helped us to tailor and launch products, money movement and payments products that specifically serve different types of customers and communities. You know, one great example is having a product called Global Pay for NGOs, right? We saw a gap that non-profits genuinely struggles to get money where it's needed when it's needed, right? And we're in 200 countries and territories. We've bridged the gap between digital and retail. So, you know, say the children from their offices in London could send on a laptop for one of their employees in the field, in somewhere incredibly remote, to pick up cash for disbursements, for salaries. And we've done the same for students, right? Recognizing the gap for international students. So someone from somewhere like China or India trying to pay for international education and bridging that gap between language and currency change, and actually how do we make that process easier? So we've really tried to take that purpose mindset into how do we integrate that, and how do we actually make our products more meaningful for the whole spectrum of stakeholders that we try to serve. And the same is true for people, right? And I really was interested in what you were just saying, Thomas, around it's not just about retaining people, right? It's about finding people who share the culture and value that you do. We used a purpose to go through, they guided our talent strategy, right? We built an employer value brand that was around creating a culture of impact. It was around deeply understanding our customer who are dual belongers or businesses who are trying to work internationally. And we've seen a huge difference in the way Western Union has got deeply in its DNA now, this idea of diversity and inclusion as part of the way it thinks, right, and the way it acts. So we've seen it guide a lot of things from both product and people, and there's other examples as well. But I thought it was interesting that you were talking about the product side and Thomas, you were talking about the people side. I think that holds very true for Western Union too.
That's great.
If you haven't talked about just one last thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's good to one last thing with philanthropy, right? You know, I'm really lucky in my role. I kind of wear a dual hat. I also am the executive director of our foundation. And Thomas, you made an interesting point around, you know, did your purpose agree with everybody? You have an activist stance. You know, we've been a long-term advocate for the rights of refugees and forcibly displaced people. And that, yeah, we've seen a huge change in sentiment in recent years. So it's a much more positive one. I think it's something that Western Union truly believed in and from a philanthropy point of view, invested in. We've helped invest around 125 million plus in over 100 countries, with a big focus on helping refugees and displaced people. And you know, we know that can be polarizing for some customers, but it's true to our purpose and something we still stayed the course with. And I think that's a really interesting comment that Thomas made.
Great. That's really terrific. Vivek, sorry to have stepped on you before. Any things you'd like to add on this?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think I loved hearing the points that I think you just made, Elizabeth. And I'll just add a couple of quick things. One is, I think, what I see a lot is, you know, how do you close the gap between a statement of purpose to the culture of purpose? There's a huge gap, right? You have a statement, then how do you create a culture of purpose? And Thomas, you talked about sort of the macro decisions that need to be taken at the executive and potentially board level. These are some of the biggest decisions that you would ever make as a leader in your company, right? It's significant, impact either way that you choose to make the decision. But I also believe that there's a lot of micro decisions that need to happen at every level of the organization for us to really close that gap that I just talked about. And I think those micro decisions made by employees, particularly, I mean, maybe not, in our industry, obviously, but particularly in industries which are serving consumers, you see examples of in the media over time where those employees are not empowered to make decisions on the basis of purpose, which actually creates negative headlines for that company. And so I feel like for many companies, many of those in the audience today, it's not just the macro decisions, it's not just the board, it's not just the senior leaders of the company. It's really every employee in whatever role that they're in needs to think about whether or not they're living the purpose of the company. And so that micro decision making is super important. So that's one point. The other one has to do with retention of employees, and why do people really commit to staying with a company and being with a business for over an extended period of time. And I think we do a study obviously like many other companies on this particular topic, and 91%, close to 91 to 93% of employees at SAP believe in the company's purpose and vision. And that's one of the major motivating forces for them to be part of this company, right? So it's a very significant deal, not just in attracting new talent, but also keeping the talent. It's super, super important. So I think I just wanted to, add those 2 points. But I'm a strong believer in this notion of micro decisions, because if you don't have this notion, and if you don't actually reward and recognize employees who are taking action on that, you're not necessarily going to get the full effect of
I think those are both really important points. And so let me ask you, we've got a couple other questions I want to get to, but maybe quickly, given that you're trying to embed purpose in all of these areas, from product to people to citizenship, and you're trying to do it at the board level and senior management level and to the frontline employees, where does purpose sit in an organization? Who's responsible for it? Thoughts? I mean, you've both been successful at it, but where would you put purpose? Elizabeth, you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. It's an interesting one because it's sat in a few different places in Western Union over time. Right? Today, it sort of sits at the intersection between corporate affairs and marketing, because for us, it's very much about how we authentically look at the external landscape and be able to pivot our organization to respond to it, to respond to stakeholder needs. And secondly, to be able to communicate it clearly and crisply, internally and externally, so people can understand it. And as Vivek said, it's so critical so that employees can genuinely live and breathe it and impact their day-to-day work. So that's where it sits in Western today, and that works for us. I'm interested in SAP's view because I genuinely think it is different for every organisation. But I do see a strong connect between kind of marketing and communications who know how to communicate it, and then kind of corporate affairs departments and even operations departments who know how to live it.
Right. Yeah, Vivek?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. I mean, in the sense that for our organization, the origination, I would say, of purpose really sits within the CEO board area, and it happens to be within marketing and communications for the most part. At least that's sort of the centerpiece of it. However, having discussed what we've just discussed, which is it has to permeate across every aspect of your business, there's an equal force multiplier that happens across multiple board areas. We have a German board structure, which is we have a number of different board areas, and each one of the board area leaders is committed to purpose as well. So in reality, you could say, well, where I sit, for instance, and Elizabeth and I are probably unique in the sense that we have purpose in our title, right? I mean, that's not a usual occurrence, but it just shows you the importance of purpose to the organization. And from our perspective, really, at least from my point of view, my role is to influence and bring together people in service of the larger goals of the company. So it's not necessarily something where we say, well, purpose is now, this is the organizational unit that drives purpose, because I don't think you can actually come up with a model that does that. But it's really, you have an organization, you have a small set of individuals, I would say a network almost of individuals who come together across multiple parts of the company. And then we provide sort of that strategic perspective. We help sort of, create the messaging. We talk about How do we actually get it in terms of, creating new products and innovations and technologies? But it requires representation from across all board areas. So, for instance, the chief sustainability officer of SAP works for our CFO, right? But they are equally invested in all of this stuff. So there is no one type of organization. There are lots of different models, but you have to have a group that actually serves as the biggest catalyst and influencer to bring things together.
That's really helpful. So wherever it sits, you need to embed it across the different areas, and whoever is responsible for driving it needs to have the skill set to be able to do that, so that this doesn't become a siloed exercise, right?
Yeah, and Paul,
Thomas,
very briefly, what I'll add to that is that notion of intentionality, right? So in the 15 interviews we conducted, I would love to tell you that, this is how purpose is governed across all of them, and it's the same way, and this is, there's a head of purpose, and it looks exactly the same across the board. But as Vivek said, there's actually a fairly wide variety of models that are being used, whether companies have a dedicated person leading purpose or not. But I think what does sort of weave all the different models together is this idea of intentionality. So being intentional about how you govern purpose, whether you decide to have somebody with the title of purpose, right, or with purpose in their title and a team around them, or whether you're intentional about saying, no, we don't want that because we want to make sure it is fully embedded within the organization and we have a way of doing that. And maybe the way of doing that is through some other means. But I just wanted to bring up that term intentional, because that's something we did here across the board.
Right. You don't just sort of accidentally stumble into this, hopefully. Right. So I think we've got time for a wrap-up question. So let me just ask you, so if a company is considering embarking on a purpose journey, what's your main advice for them? What should they look out for? What should they be sure to do? And maybe Elizabeth, you want to take a run at that one?
Sure, I'll give a very short answer. I think a great start place is to ask, for the company to ask itself, have we got the right lens have we talked to our stakeholders? Have we deeply listened to them? Have we listened and learned, so that we can define our organization's authentic role, the value that we can bring to society, that simultaneously being able to help us grow our business and have a positive impact in the world, right? So that for me is the place to start, and then secondly, to deeply embed that in the organization, right? If the majority of employees are disengaged, or if they're agitating for change, right? They want to have decisions and behaviours in an organisation that they can be proud to stand behind. That for me is a really good place to start. And I'll leave it there near some time so that Vivek can give his viewpoint.
Great. But what you just said echoes a comment we received from the audience about this being such an empowering thing for employees if you do it right. Vivek, what's your main advice for a company?
So my main advice is be authentic. I think there's tons of companies who are going to get into purpose washing and all of these things that we've known. But I think, the biggest thing that I would say is be authentic to who you are as a business, and, lead from the heart, not necessarily always, from the brain. So that's one piece. And I would also say that whenever you embark on a purpose journey, be cognizant of the fact that you are going to have to make some incredibly hard decisions. So this is not an easy road to start on. So be very aware, especially now, because the days of actually having a purpose statement and sort of straddling the fence or sitting on the fence on some key issues is over. And so you have to be willing to make the decisions, the hard decisions as a company, to take a stand. Brought up activism earlier. So my two keywords are authenticity and activism.
Got it.
Think about those.
Great. And Thomas, I think I'm going to let you have the last word via your report, because we're wrapping up here, but I think what you just heard is captured in your report. So I just want to thank Thomas, you, and Vivek, and Elizabeth for your time today. I think this has been enormously thoughtful and valuable. We could have done this for a whole few hours. As I mentioned at the outset, Thomas has a report on this subject coming up in the next few weeks. It's an excellent one you won't want to miss, and we'll be happy to share a copy of it with everyone who's watched this webcast. Thomas's suggestion is let's include the list of those 15 companies that have included their purpose statements in their SEC filings. I think that's a good appendix to the report. The slide deck that's posted in the download section of the bottom of your screen has links to on-demand and upcoming webcasts on the topics we touched on today, as well as some recent publications. And thanks again for joining us. Please don't forget to complete the evaluation form. And thanks again to the panelists. Thanks for all of you for joining us. Stay safe, be well, and live your life with purpose. Thank you.